Hello and welcome to Expected Value, the podcast that goes inside the sports analytics world. Episode 56 of our show, our Joe DiMaggio episode, if you will. With the Chiefs winning the Super Bowl on Sunday, another NFL regular season and playoffs are in the books. So once all the celebrating and commiserating is done, it's on to the offseason and the NFL draft, which will be in Kansas City, coincidentally, in late April. So to talk about the NFL scouting process, both college and pro, we'll be joined today by Rodrik David, a former Falcons scout who now heads up Right Step Advising, which helps agents, athletes, and schools figure out the next right step for them and their football careers. Rodrik and I will talk about the Super Bowl and how he watches games through a scout's eye, how he got into a scouting career and his path to the pros, differences between college scouting and pro scouting, how data comes into that scouting process and what's changed data-wise over the last decade, the most useful ways that data helps him as a scout, advice for data-minded people who want to work better with the scouting side, reconciling differences in data and the eye test, and a whole lot more. Then producer Sergio de la Espriella will join me to react and wrap things up. Without further ado, here's the Expected Value conversation with former Falcons scout Rodrik David. We're joined now on Expected Value by Rodrik David, founder of Right Step Advising, which will advise you on almost anything in the football world, and a former Falcons scout. Rodrik, let's start. We're recording this the day after the Super Bowl, so we have to start right there. High-level general reactions to the Super Bowl from you.
Yeah, Paul, thanks for having me on. It's good to be here. Man, fantastic game. That's exactly what the NFL wants, right down to the wire. Kept everybody in it, right until about 10 seconds left, and that final field goal was attempted, and it was holding. Absolutely, you got to make the call. I think I saw somebody tweet out that you're going to call a close offsides, a close false start, you got to call a close holding. So that's the way the game goes. The fact that it's, right there, down there to the end. Jalen Hurts played fantastic. Has continued to prove people wrong. I thought that was fantastic. Andy Reid continues to show he is going to be one of the great coaches in NFL history. And I think there's times he does not get enough credit. And you saw it. He did it forever in Philly and obviously now in Kansas City. But really good game. Just really enjoyed watching it. And I enjoyed watching the game. Forget about the halftime show and the commercials. I enjoyed the game.
Yeah, it was a great game. And I'll say, as a Dolphins fan living in Kansas, so obviously surrounded by Chiefs fans and getting to watch a lot of the Chiefs, it's just fun to watch the Chiefs offense. I mean, the Dolphins offense has been kind of for about 2 decades, but just it's the creativity and the play call of, and even, just little things like Greg Olsen pointed out on the Kelsey touchdown. Now Kelsey, just moving him inside to get him matched up with the safety, or the simple motion before the snap to get the guys open on those 2 other touchdown passes. It's just fun. And the Eagles offense has so much talent and do some different things. They're fun too. So I thought it was a really fun game too.
Yep. Really entertaining, back and forth. Again, exactly what you wanted. There was nobody that really completely just dominated. Good players were good. And it was the Chiefs offensive line answered a lot of questions, and just a really fantastic game.
With your scout brain, do you watch, or how do you watch the Super Bowl differently from me, from a normal fan? How does that part of your brain kick in any differently watching a game?
Yeah, I would say I tend to focus in on some of the micro aspects. Again, you start talking about Hassan Reddick versus Andrew Wiley as a tackle. You see, all right, who's matching up with Kelsey? Again, is he going to be a safety, a linebacker? You start seeing some of the zone read stuff, some of the RPO stuff, where I'm looking, again, hearkening back to my pro scouting days. Again, I'm just trying to pick up little things pre-snap, in game situation, down and distance, that may allow me to have my eyes where I'm going to see something a little bit different than just the general fan who is going to be, sitting back, watching a good, entertaining game. So I really like to narrow in on some of the micro stuff. Again, the trenches. I always love O-line, D-line. I'd rather watch those two positions than anything else. And I probably tend to miss some of the big stuff on the outside. Again, you're going to see it on your periphery, but to see how what's a guard versus a three tech doing, what's the center doing, where is he kicking to when you have players like Chris Jones and Fletcher Cox inside. Again, seeing some of those little matchups and who's winning is where I really narrow in on.
Yeah, so it sounds like your average player. Not player, your average watcher, like someone like me, you're often just watching the ball. It sounds like your eyes are often maybe somewhere else, and you almost miss what happens in the play sometimes because you're so locked in on a matchup elsewhere on the field.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's always one of the big scouting adages is keep your eyes off the ball. Obviously, watching specific matchups, specific players. It all watching Patrick Mahomes after he hands the ball off to see how that foot looks, and same thing. Jalen Hurts, what's he doing away from the ball? What's Travis Kelce doing away from the ball? What's Jason Kelce doing backside on a run block? All those little things that really tells you about the players that are playing the game and what level they are actually at. Because again, there's only one football and 22 players out there, so you'll miss a lot of big picture football if you're always watching the ball.
So I want to talk about how you got into your career. Obviously, you can't go to college and major in scouting. It's something that you came to a different route. So what was your route? What's kind of a normal route for someone who is into football and finds his way into that scouting world?
Yeah, there is no normal way into the scouting world. I'll tell you that. There's probably, for every scout out there, there's probably a fairly unique story. But just about everybody, whatever the story is, they got associated with football somehow, no matter what they were doing as a player, coach, personnel guy, intern. I know people that came from the ticketing world just because they wanted to be around football. For me, I grew up around football. My dad was a high school coach, very successful for over 30 years, small town in Colorado. And so I was always around football. I went to play at Nebraska Wesleyan University, played corner, safety there. And through my time at Wesleyan, I started noticing scheme, great, whatever. I understood scheme. I didn't enjoy the scheme aspect of it, though. I enjoyed narrowing in on, again, individual matchups. Hey, what wide receivers are we going to be seeing this week? What are they doing? What are their strengths, and weaknesses? And basically, over my time there, I started, talking to some different people, and they were like, "Hey, you should think about scouting." I was going to do something in football, coaching, scouting. Again, I wasn't really privy to a lot of the scouting background. Again, I didn't know anybody at that time that was in scouting, but I started reaching out to some scouts from mutual contacts, and it was like, hey, I think I really do see the world from a scouting role as opposed to a coaching role. So from there, started basically just, hey, what's the best next step after I get done with my undergrad? Of course, that was, again, going to grad school and being around a big premier football program that had 32 plus scouts, NFL scouts, CFL scouts. And for me, that ended up being Ohio State. Pretty good program, have a few NFL players come through there. I knew if I could get in with a football program, I would probably rub shoulders, maybe shake hands at some point with somebody that would maybe open that next door for me. And through a lot of hard work, persistence, everything like that, it eventually worked out. Again, a couple internships, seasonal scouting things before I went back and coached for a little bit at Case Western up in Cleveland before I finally made it as a scouting assistant with the Falcons in February of 2016.
All right, so let's talk through your time with the Falcons. You said you worked on the college side and the pro side. It's somewhat self-evident, but from your inside football perspective, like what's the difference between scouting college, scouting pro? Obviously, your purposes are different, but there's got to be some different way you're watching, have kind of a different mindset approaching the two.
Yeah, like you said, pretty self-evident. Of course, you're focusing on college as opposed to pro. The biggest change for me when I went from pro scouting to college scouting is, one, as a college scout, you have to work extra hard to understand what NFL rosters look like And it's always important, number one, that you understand your own roster, because again, you're always trying to upgrade your own roster, but you quickly lose track of what teams around the NFL are doing when you are on the road focusing on, 600 to 700 college athletes in your area. You're going to end up submitting maybe 300 reports by December, January. So it's really hard to maintain that what a pro roster looks like. And same thing on the pro side. Until March or April, you have really no full landscape of what the NFL draft is going to look like. You're focusing on team needs and everything through the process. What are teams going to be looking at, free agency, all those things. But from a micro standpoint with the scouting, when you are in the college world, you are almost always looking at players in a 2 to 3 year, what do I project this player to be? He is this now. I think he's going to get to this level, whether it's 2 notches up, 3 notches up, whatever it is, if he's a finished product. And on the pro world, for the most part, you are evaluating finished products. There's always going to be development, of course. There's always going to be players that have good years, up years, down years, but you are in the pro world, you are evaluating the player for what they're putting on film every week. In the college, again, you get it projected a little bit more scheme specific. How would they look in your system? Again, you're maybe talking 19, 20-year-old athletes. Hey, what's this guy going to look like when he's 24 and can focus on football all the time? And that's probably the biggest difference, just that projection versus finished product idea.
From a data standpoint, let's talk the college side first. How do you bring data into the equation, whether it's traditional stats, measurements, other metrics a team might have? How do you combine that with your scouting eye in the process?
Yeah, it is. Again, everybody's going to do it a little bit different. Every team does a little bit different. I always used to say it's just a part of another piece of the puzzle that you have. And again, the more data we have now in today's day and age, it just gives you more pieces to maybe put the puzzle together. Like you said, the first thing is always there is a fairly standard, this is what an NFL player looks like at this position. You start getting outside of the fat part of your bell curve. Those are your outliers, both on the top end, the players that are really rare trait-wise, and then again, there's NFL players, again, Jason Kelce, who is on the underside of how has he managed to make it as long as he has, undersized. Well, of course, it's the athleticism, but what other traits outside of the verified measurements, the verified data that you have, that has allowed those players to make it. And again, from the pro and college side, the pro side, again, you have a pretty good idea of what a pro player looks like college-wise. Again, that starts to help you, hey, how good can this player be if he's 2 inches short, not as long as he needs to be, he's underweight. Again, you have to start being really special in other areas. So that data that you start gleaning through just gives you a better and better idea of, hey, this guy, he is really rare here, or he's a little bit short here, and just helps you again find the other questions that you need to ask to get your final answer.
And has the use of data, how has that changed over the last 10 years or so? Obviously, in general, data has exploded in sports, but specifically to the scouting side, either college or pro. How has the availability, the accessibility, the use of that evolved over the last decade or so?
Yeah, the biggest thing is it probably helps you answer questions more quickly. It allows you to, and then ultimately answer more questions. I remember back in the 2016 draft, I had just come in, and we were, if there was a question about a player, missed tackles for loss, certain situations, you were cutting probably 12, 13 games of tape to try to highlight those plays, pull them into a specific cut up. That way the GM, the director, the owner, whoever it may be able to can look at that film and get that answer. Now you probably have 2 or 3 different data sources that are trusted again, maybe the data was there in 2016. It's now a more and more trusted source linked with the film, where you can click a few buttons and in 20 minutes you have that cut up of exactly what specific situation, down and distance, again, scheme versus a player's level. You can just cut it so much quicker now, to where you can quickly go through and maybe feel like you have a little bit better answer. And so it's I would say for the lower level, the scouting assistants of the world, you have a little bit easier time. You don't have to burn as much film to go through and find some of that stuff. It's again, the data source is out there. You just click a few buttons to find what you need.
Yeah, so you're saying you don't have to watch this whole season of games to find these, whatever, dozen, 2 dozen of a certain kind of play or situation that you're looking for. You use the data to get there. So basically just making you more efficient in the whole process, right?
Exactly. Efficiency is, again, allows you to do a lot of other projects, and maybe just watch a little bit more of your own film instead of doing some of that work for the higher levels.
Specifically on the college side, what other kind of information or data can you get out of these, Senior Bowl, Combine, Pro Days, these type of things that are going to happen between basically now and the draft? What do you get out of that? Whether it's, more personal type of things, whether it's data related, what kind of info do you gather in that process?
Yeah, from the data side, again, this is for some players, it may be the first time you get a verified measurement. Again, exactly how long is he, exactly how tall, and what his weight is. Again, that's one of the biggest things that scouts want to see through the process is what, for some guys, what has their weight done. One of the really kind of unique challenges for college scouts is you may have a really good player that is used very scheme specifically in college, where the hashes are wider. Again, you think about the nickel overhang big safety player that is going to play in the overhang to the field. That's going to be a spot, and the college team is good with him being 210 pounds, but that role may not exist for half the NFL teams. And all of a sudden you see his weight number jump from 210 to 225. And it's, again, the college has been telling you, yeah, he could get up to 225, 230. All of a sudden he jumps up, and it's like, okay, the trend is in the right direction. Same thing with pass rushers, guys that, again, they're playing 60 snaps a game on the college level as a rush outside linebacker, defensive end at 200 and 215, 220 pounds, just because they may have an average nutrition plan at this school, depending on the size. And all of a sudden they get to, say, the East-West Shrine game, and they weigh in at 235 or 240, and their weight is continuing the right direction. It's like, hey, this guy can maintain. This guy can play at 240, 245. The frame looks good. His body's supporting it. So again, he's tracking some of that stuff where every college team, pro liaison, strength coach is going to tell you that this guy's going to be able to do it. But, the proof is in the pudding, and until the guy actually steps on the scale multiple times and shows the right trend line, it's just something that you're having to trust a source instead of trusting the data.
And no, we'll just call it the skill positions. I know a lot of people hate that term, but we'll use that as shorthand for your quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, etc. They have the traditional stats that are, relatively easy to find. You get some sense of what they've done, at least from that. Other positions, your linemen and such, are much more difficult to quantify. So does data, whether it's those stats, whether it's metrics, whether it's measurements, does it help more with certain positions than others as you're trying to figure out how guys will, fit in from college to the pros or moving between teams? There's certain positions where you're looking for different things compared to others?
Yeah, again, each scheme is always going to have little things that may separate players a little bit, and every team has maybe a little bit formula for some of their different analytical studies that are going to, again, separate things out: a pass rush rate, a protection rate, all going to depend on, again, where is a player lined up pre-snap, again, taking away pressures, linebackers. Again, some teams will start taking out last last 2 minutes of each half, if you get up by a certain number of points, just because, again, that changes the way an offense or defense is going to call a game. So there's certain things that, they're certainly going to start pulling those pieces of data out. And I would say it's certainly one of those things where specific players, you're going to dig more into the numbers. Your top players, you're going to be able to put on the film and, see that, hey, he's special, he's good. The data is now maybe just going to tell you, do I like him slightly more than this or slightly less than this? Maybe it's a historical comparison. It's, again, some of those outliers where you really lean on that data more because, again, this guy, again, he's undersized, but he is quick. You start thinking about some of the separation data we have now, where this guy is always open. He's always 2+ yards away from the nearest defender. Again, you start pulling up those cut-ups with your different film, and it's like, this guy always is pulling away, or it's like, they just always zoned him. He's always going to be open because he's always in zone. And so that's where some of that data is going to, again, always lead you back to the film. But again, you want some of that stuff, and all of a sudden it's a really short cut up. It's like, man, this, so he doesn't have any snaps of film that say that he's going to be able to overcome this. Again, it just leads you to try to answer that question in a different way, and just leads you ultimately back to more and more film that you can try to go find stuff.
Yeah, and it's always nice when there is data that can quantify something that you talk about. You talked about, scouts always say, this guy is always open. And now we have a way to quantify that in certain capacities, which is always nice. If you're talking to an analyst type, someone, that you're working with, what kind of advice do you give to, I'll just call them the data types, the analyst types, as opposed to someone coming from the scouting angle? What kind of advice do you give those analysts as they try to communicate and work better with the scouting side?
Yeah, the more football you can understand, the better off you'll be. The more you'll understand what the data is trying to say, what questions coaches, scouts, directors are trying to answer with the data. Again, I go back to 2016 when some of the major data outlets were really getting into it, and they would try to quantify something with data that just wasn't right. And again, it's from a data standpoint, from somebody that doesn't understand football, what a scheme is trying to do, what a player is trying to do. It seems right, but again, the more football you understand, the more you'll be able to answer what question are they actually trying to answer. So, but at the same time, if you're a data person, you're a data person. A scout's a scout, a coach is a coach. Understand where you're coming from. Hey, this is what the data says. I acknowledge that, this may be not what they're not trying to do to them from a scheme or coaching, scouting side of it. But again, kind of marrying those two things that will really allow you to have a really good big picture of everything going on.
And kind of the opposite question almost. What do you suggest to scouts who maybe they're coming from a pure football side, and now they have opportunities as more and more data is available to use that in some kind of way, or to speak to analysts and try to, make everybody better at their job? What do you say to that scouting side trying to work better with data and people who work on the data side more?
Yeah. I mean, it all has its place. There's old school scouts where it's just about the film. Yes, it's about the film. Let the data drive you back to the film to, again, help you answer your questions. Be open to, asking the questions that maybe, 10 years ago, you couldn't get the answer. 5 years ago, maybe you didn't trust the answer. Well, again, let it drive you back to that spot to where there's all these different puzzle pieces out there. And again, nobody has the box to look at the picture. You're just trying to put the puzzle, giant jigsaw puzzle together based on all the different pieces you have. Use every piece of information you have through the process to help you when you walk away. Every scout sitting there on draft day if you have any questions unanswered, you didn't finish your job. And so again, all these pieces, data, film, character, background, weight room, academics, everything has to be answered. Use every resource you have out there.
It's a big puzzle that we're
It
all
is a
trying to
big
figure
puzzle.
out, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I want to ask about your current role with Right Step Advising, where, as you said, you will help people with just about anything related to football. Specifically on the agent side, how do you see agents? How do you advise agents to use data? How to combine that with the things that they're already doing? How does it help them in that process? It's kind of a hidden part of the football world a little bit. How do the numbers and such come into play on that agent side?
Yeah. Two things, that really come to mind. On the pro side, all the data we have access to, again, helps your comparisons. When you start talking future contract negotiations and where is this player slotted, who's going to like this player, all that data you have is going to help you, again, just glean through that information and, in my opinion, hopefully make negotiating a little bit easier. Understand, again, narrowing in on those teams that you really think have a home for it. On the college side, again, there is data out there for 2024, 2025, 2026 prospects at this point that are going to help agents start to focus in on some of those maybe top guys, or again, go back to what does an NFL player look like? Guys that are 5'10" or 180 pounds that are lighting up the stat world. Again, not a ton of those guys in the NFL, but the raw developmental 6'2", 240-pound, really long linebacker that just has been sitting there behind, whoever, super productive player at any school. Again, that looks like an NFL player. You watch him run, it looks like an NFL player. All the data out there is going to help you just kind of identify those guys and maybe uncover some of those guys that, hey, all they need is the opportunity. Once the senior leaves in front of them, they'll be players, and you can be a little bit out in front of maybe some of your competition if you kind of focus in on those things.
And with the NIL changes, the transfer portal, and the college game has just been transformed so much in the last just couple of years. How does all that come into play from a number standpoint? How do you see people using things differently in order to get different places, do different things in this brave new world or whatever of the college landscape?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest offset now is they have a dollar valuation, very specific dollar valuation, to try to match. If you're talking a fourth, fifth to highly sought after undrafted free agent, where there's still a question out there, you've got a dollar valuation. Again, those guys are looking at the data where, hey, I'm probably the 23rd corner on the board, and if I come back another year, maybe there's this number. Again, I fit in this part of the curve. My stats only show that I'm this level of player. Again, all that information, again, is just going to help them, in my opinion, help them make the best decision available for them. Again, there's every situation different for players going to the NFL, developing in the NFL, going back to college, developing in college. And again, for some of these players, getting paid when they can get paid, because the NFL is a tough world to make it in. And though no football is guaranteed, I tell guys all the time, college is slightly more guaranteed, because it may be somewhere you've been at, and you can be a very good college football player and not ever see the field in the NFL.
We've talked about this, referenced it kind of a couple times, but I'm curious if you have an example of a time when your eye test maybe said this guy is great, but the numbers contradicted that, or you didn't see something with the eyes and the numbers like, hey, maybe take another look because it looks like something's popping here. How do you reconcile those two things as a scout when initially, at least, and again, we're speaking very broadly, the eye test says one thing and the numbers suggest something else?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the number one thing is go back and burn more film. Go back multiple years. Try to go back and remember, go through your practice notes from when you were out there at fall camp or Tuesday, Wednesday practice, and think about, again, some of those situations. I always tried to reconcile it with the character side of it. Again, how did the strength coach, how did the academic side, how did the coaches talk about it, and the player, does it make sense? Does one lead to another again, or is it more conflicting information where you have to, again, all right, I got to go turn over another stone. I got to call another coach. I've got to call another source to try to find out why does this not make sense? It's often the case with smaller school athletes where you get your biggest discrepancies, where, again, the data says this player should be outstanding, but just for whatever reason, you looked at them, again, eye test. Again, there was a certain, so I think I can go ahead and say it. There was a Western Kentucky quarterback in the recent drafts who eye test told me that I did not think that this player was going to be better than a backup quarterback. And obviously he got drafted in a good spot. He did some good things, in starting. But again, his numbers, you can't argue with the numbers. He was unbelievable, high numbers. Again, you start looking at what that offensive system has done over the years. That's a very, very quarterback-friendly offense and very offensive-friendly offense. Again, not to hold that against the player, but it provides context to the overall thing. On the big stage, again, you start thinking about players that have, I go back and the Atlanta Falcons drafted Russell Gage, I believe a 5th or 6th round player, highly sought after recruit that was behind a bunch of 1st and 2nd round NFL receivers, was a really good special teams player at LSU, and just continued to progress and develop. And again, the eye test told you there should be something about this player. The character said there should be something about this player that you like. Obviously, on-field film, there just was not a ton of it. But again, did some things in practice when maybe some of those other guys were, getting plays off where it's like, hey, yeah, this guy, we can pull the card and feel really good about it, even though on his game footage maybe wouldn't tell you that it's going to work out that way.
Ask a couple questions just about this upcoming draft. I know we're a couple of months away, but never too early, of course, to talk about it. The Bears have a number 1 pick. They have a quarterback in Justin Fields that looks like he could be the guy. So they have a decision to make there. But just your general thoughts on what do you think the Bears, what's their thought process? What might they be thinking as they get ready for this draft?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm the Bears, I am listening to every offer, regardless of whether it is for the draft pick or for the quarterback. I had the privilege of scouting Justin for a couple years. I really like Justin. I had a big grade on Justin. I think he can be a successful NFL quarterback. But again, I don't know if there is a player in the NFL that it would be a player that I wouldn't be willing to listen to. There's a price tag for everybody, right? And if somebody just absolutely blows down the door, either for Justin or for that number 1 pick, again, I think you have to be willing to listen. It's about what's best for your organization, for your team. And again, you want to do right by Justin, you want to do right by the team, the fan base, all those things. But if, again, whatever offer comes, you're doing your homework on, in my opinion, probably the top 2 guys at quarterback. And then again, who's the player that maybe 1 or 2 players, a couple spots down that you're targeting. And again, you're looking at up and down those pro rosters where, hey, if they want to deal maybe some of those good pro players, hey, be willing to listen and, entertain any offer.
Anybody that you would suggest, people keep an eye on, that whether it's a later pick or later 1st round pick or someone that's jumped off the page but is not thought of as a top 5, 10, 15 talent, someone that you just suggest keeping an eye on coming up?
Yeah. I mean, I went through, and this was a really fun one because, again, you start thinking about the players that over the last couple of years, again, COVID giving all these guys extra years, where there's many guys in this draft that I have done a lot of work on. Some of the guys that Dwan Jones from Ohio State has continued to impress me. He had a great all-star week it is one of the biggest human beings that I've ever seen. Again, I think about a guy like Mekhi Becton. That's a massive human being. That's DeJuan Jones, and he has continued to answer some of the questions that I would have had if he came out early, maybe a year ago. His condition looks to be really top notch. He has worked on the technique, not just relied on being, again, a massive human being that gets by on being massive. There's two tailbacks that I love. Mohamed Ibrahim out at Minnesota, again, one of the most fun running backs that I have done in the last number of years. And then Chris Rodriguez out of Kentucky, again, just tough, hard-nosed, downhill guys. I think they're great guys they're plug and play. You want them on your roster. Again, you know what they are. They're not going to be Saquon Barkley. You're not looking for that kind of explosion. But again, you're going to hand this guy the ball 15, 20 times a game. You know exactly what you're getting. And then a couple under radar guys. B.J. Thompson out of Stephen F. Austin. He had a really, really good SFA game. Again, you start talking about one of those guys that has to answer the weight questions. A program like SFA, not much of a nutrition plan, was always going to be battling to keep the weight on. Obviously, a Baylor transfer, has some stuff that he's worked through in his past, but I think he weighed in close to 240 at the East-West, which was up a good significant margin from what he played at. Best competition, continuing to run by people. And then a kid from Ball State, again, a school that I had in the Midwest, Ball State, Johannes Tyler, a big, long, 6'3", 210-pound receiver that I think is going to run better than everybody expects him to, catches the ball. When they had another receiver there last year that it was a really good 1-2 punch. Johannes got a lot of extra attention this year, still really productive for Coach New's offense. Those are two guys, and I just kind of have in my back pocket, just continuing to watch them, see where they end up going. It's those are guys that are really fun. That again, they look like NFL football players, and I think they'll end up fitting in real nice somewhere.
Yeah, I like it. Some good names for us to keep an eye on. I got to follow up on the running back thing, only because this is kind of almost a cliche of, I'll just say analyst versus scout again, to speak broadly, where the analysts say running backs don't matter, which is not entirely true. That's not what anybody says, but there is probably a little more of kind of what you said, a plug and play mentality to that. And I think a lot of it's related more to dollars than anything else. So I'm curious about how you approach running backs, because there is certainly that stance that it's not worth the pick, maybe is a better way of saying it, to take a high pick or pay him a ton of money. But at the same time, not every fourth round running back pans out, obviously, either. How do you kind of approach that running back position as things have evolved over the last, especially I think 5 or 10 years?
Yeah, I think like you said, the value is probably the biggest thing on that pick. Again, my personal philosophy, take a first or second round running back every 3 or 4 years, because you don't ever want to pay him the big money that, we've seen. Again, players like Zeke Elliott, obviously very good player in his time. He's not the same Zeke that, signed that contract. Obviously, Saquon Barkley is going to be a really interesting conversation this year. And again, you look at Isaiah Pacheco. He was a 7th round draft pick that was productive. And again, if you're a pass heavy offense, that's all you need. And so yeah, to find that scheme fit, zone, power, downhill, to find the combination. Hey, we already have a small guy. We need a big guy. We already have a big guy. Let's find a small guy. Let's find just good, versatile all-around backs. We'll have 2 or 3 of them. Ride the hot hand. That's probably a little bit of what Kansas City was. And again, match those guys up, marry them up, have them fit in your offense, whether it's a pass catcher, just a downhill grinder, kind of do everything guy, and then just find a way to keep yourself from overvaluing a guy in your offense, because it's a deep position. Just about every year there are always guys that end up popping, getting cut down at the last, down to 53 that have value, and guys that are 1 or 2 years, and then it's like, where did they go? And so you gotta, I would say you just have to make sure you maintain your conviction on where you value the player.
Yeah, a lot of tough decisions and such to make.
Always.
All right, let's finish things up with our playing favorites here, where we rip through a number of your favorites. So tell me what your favorite number is and why.
Number 2, it was my college number, so I just always got to roll with that one. It's a nice number, single digit. Got to love it.
Favorite player of yours as a kid?
I was a Brett Favre guy growing up. Again, you're talking 3 MVPs there in the mid '90s when I, started getting to pick my own. I lived close to Denver, and that was the Denver-Green Bay rivalry that was good during those middle years of the '90s. And but I was a Brett Favre guy, tough as they come, not afraid to throw it around, throw his body around. So I'm Brett Favre always.
Do you have any favorite, I don't know, call it nerdy thing you keep track of, whether, spreadsheets or something you keep for fun or whatever it might be, something like that?
Man, I love a good spreadsheet. Nothing crazy. Again, I keep a lot of stuff in spreadsheets. I am in the process of starting to put, I'm a baseball card collector. So I'm starting to put some of that stuff in from, all the stuff over the years. But yeah, I wouldn't say anything real crazy there.
All right. Find something in your kids' lives and make a spreadsheet out of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Someone will thank you maybe someday, or just think you're a nerd.
Something like that.
You have a favorite how did I get here moment? Meaning one of those moments where you're just kind of like, wow, this is a pretty wild, cool, weird situation I've gotten into professionally, but you're able to kind of appreciate it for all the quirkiness that it is.
Yeah, 2 things come to mind. Again, I got to stand on the field pregame of the Super Bowl when we got to play the Patriots. Again, you start snapping a photo of yourself at midfield, 4 yards, from the field. I mean, that's kind of like, again, how did I from little old Burlington, Colorado get here? And then the other one was shortly after that. There was a I would consider him a future Hall of Fame player that unfortunately his time had come to an end, and I had to be the one to call him, let him know that the coach and GM needed to talk to him and he needed to bring his iPad playbook in. So to do that to somebody that is going to be in Canton, it's kind of one of those head scratchers where it's like, wow, this is a business. And the fact that I was the one that made the call is just, kind of odd.
All right. Rodrik David, founder of Right Step Advising and former Falcon scout. We appreciate all the insight. Thanks for joining us here on Expected Value.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, guys.
Back in the TruMedia studios, I'm Paul Carr. Thanks to Rodrik David for joining us on the show. You can follow him on Twitter at Rodrik David. Check out Right Step Advising at rsafootball.com. You can find both those things, among others, in our show notes. I'm joined now by producer Sergio de la Espriella. Sergio, before we get into the talk with Rodrik, Super Bowl was yesterday. Our Dolphins were not in it, but what did anything jump out at you, particularly enjoyed from the Super Bowl?
Are our Dolphins ever in it?
Next year they're going to be in it.
Just like we say this every year. Just like
30 years and whatever. Yeah.
Hey, it was the 50th anniversary of 1972, right. So no one can ever take that away from us.
That's right.
No, I liked the game overall. I thought it was a really fun game to watch. Things kind of took off at the beginning, and then I think Patrick Mahomes got some horse tranquilizers or something, because I have no idea how that man was able to run so quickly, and he was very clearly grimacing after every extraneous effort he put on that ankle. So I just think that's like another feather in the potential GOAT conversation that we may be having in about 15 years or so. And I thought at the end, the holding penalty, I think that's something that Rodrik really mentioned right at the beginning, where you got to call things if you're going to be calling these super minute false starts or, in high leverage situations, the most high leverage of all situations in the NFL, then you got to call it. I didn't think there was enough for holding, but I also understand if you do believe that, then yeah, you got to call it. So I like his mentality there, but overall I thought it was a great game. And it was nice to see quite clearly the 2 best teams in each conference go at it, which we don't usually get. And it gave us, a 38-35 thriller that really had a place in the archives of NFL history if Mahomes does go on to become as great as we all think he will.
Yep. And I think from kind of analytics perspective, really more of game management, the fact that the Eagles like you knew they were going to go for it on fourth down, and they knew they were going to go for it on fourth down. You saw multiple times. It's 3rd and 7 or whatever, and they could run a relatively short yardage running play because they know if they only get 3 or 4 yards, they're still going to go for it on 4th and 3. And I think it just changed kind of the tenor of the game and the approach. Usually you get a 3rd down stop and you're so excited from a defensive standpoint or a fan standpoint. And it's not quite the same. Like your just mentality's got to be different of stopping them on 4 downs is a normal thing. I'm excited to see where that goes because, I mean, 4th down is just high leverage and high entertainment. But it's also smart to go for it a lot of the time. And I think that's just going to keep evolving. You know, they're not the only team that plays this way, but I think more and more teams are going to get more aggressive. And this was kind of a nice little microcosm of what I think we're just going to see more of as people get a little more accustomed and comfortable looking at those numbers and making decisions.
Yeah, and it was funny because at halftime, I remember I saw the Ringer's Ben Solak, who uses our site and media partner and stuff. So little plug there, but he tweeted a screenshot of the first half statistics. And when you looked at 3rd and 4th down conversions, he circled it. And the Eagles were like 3 of 4 on 3rd downs and 2 of 2 on 4th, whereas the Chiefs were 0 for 3 on 3rd and didn't even attempt a 4th down conversion, where there were some opportunities where they probably could have gone for it instead of kicking and stuff like that.
Kicked the field goal, missed the field goal. Was justifiable to go for it.
Right. On a stats perspective, too, I think those 2 4th quarter touchdowns by the Chiefs, they were the exact same play, just run on opposite sides of the field with different players. So that first one where Kadarius Toney kind of runs into motion, as a Florida fan and as someone who saw Kadarius Toney on his field, he went into motion and I went, oh, they're going to run the Dan Mullen goal line play. And that's exactly what they did. He's so fast, no one can stop him there. So I'm interested to see how teams approach calling multiple plays in similar situations as kind of like a 3D mind game with the defense. Because you would think that the defense is kind of prepared for that situation where maybe the defense is zigging while people zag, and that's exactly what happened. Where instead of kind of focusing over on those motioned players, they use that disguise in order to send a blitz. And then you had, I forgot the other Chiefs player scored the second one, but on the opposite side of the field, Scott Moore, the exact same play, and he just walked into the end zone. So statistically, I'm interested to see how teams can look at the continuous running of the same play and the effectiveness of that same play being run, and especially in high leverage situations like the 4th quarter of the Super Bowl.
Right. Is that what you're going to bust out a play from week 1? Or
exactly. What are you going to do
on
there?
Tape, or you ran earlier in the game? Or I think there's a lot to do with motion too. You know, we've seen some teams be really successful. It just gives you information. We saw that mentioned on that first Chiefs touchdown. Kelsey goes in motion to get a different matchup. It works out well. So it's a valuable thing I think we'll see a lot more of. All right. What else kind of jumped out at you from the conversation we had talking with Rodrik?
Well, sticking with the NFL, but sticking with quarterbacks, I liked how we got a scout's perspective on this upcoming, what's bound to dominate the draft discussion in the next 6 to 8 weeks.
Right.
And it's, do the Bears trade the number 1 overall pick to build around Justin Fields, or do they just take someone like a Bryce Young or maybe a CJ Stroud and kind of try to get a younger quarterback with 2 extra years of rookie, flexibility and the cap to build their team? I think it was a big kind of stamp of approval for Justin Fields that we had an NFL scout from a team that wasn't associated with the Bears, someone who hasn't worked in that organization before, and was kind of like, no, I mean, I scouted him, I liked him, and it really shows that there's a lot more to building a team than just the spreadsheet, right? Where you can get under the cap and you have the cap to add other assets, but what good is that if you have a player that doesn't gel well? And this is just quarterbacks in this example, but a quarterback that doesn't gel well with the city, or a quarterback that doesn't maybe necessarily work well with other aspects of the team. And we saw how the Bears kind of built that offense around Justin Fields this past season.
Right.
While it didn't result in many wins, it was a significant improvement from what they had in the seasons prior. So I really liked that. And I also I liked how he talked about the NIL changes and how the difference with college players now versus when he was scouting with the Falcons, around the time where they were in the Super Bowl and such. Those things weren't a factor, at least above the table.
Right.
Those as someone who loves college football, I can't.
What?
I mean, I can't lie to the audience, but at least now there's this legitimate, like, is the player worth more at the collegiate level than they're worth at the NFL. Is it worth it for a player to make X amount of dollars coming back as a 5th year or 6th year senior versus maybe going undrafted and being on the practice squad or being a late round pick and getting cut? You never know. So I like seeing those differences and how he, as a scout would have approached that and such.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, totally agree. And coming off Super Bowl, we have one quarterback on his rookie deal, one quarterback on his max deal. So to the Justin Fields point, there are different ways to do it. You just got to figure out what it is. One thing that struck me is I was like asking from the, again, scouting perspective, what does an analyst need to know to communicate better and things like that. And he talked about, learn more football. And something I always preach to people in that analyst role, it came into play a lot in my researcher role at ESPN, is it's the same thing. It's speak the language. I don't mean that literally, but it's just learning terminology. There's one instance where researcher was talking, I think it was to Teddy Bruschi, and just said something about, well, the mic was over here, something like that. And just that he said the mic, like Teddy kind of perked up. He's like, oh, you like know what that's called. That's not an advanced stat. That is not a super advanced thing in the football world, but it perked him up and gave him a little bit more respect. So sometimes it's simple like that. A lot of times it's just learning, like, how do they think and what do they need and how you can help them, because that's often the best way to work together. And I have an example of 2014 World Cup working with Roberto Martinez, and it was an Italy game, and he was asking, just listening to him talk during the first half about Pirlo's not, moving Italy forward, whatever. And so he asked, like, how many passes Pirlo completed. So I gave him the number, and then I also gave him how many of those were forward. It was a very low percentage relatively, and which just pointed to the fact that that's exactly what he was saying. He was not getting Italy into any sort of transition or moving into the attack. And he liked that, and it opened the door. Suddenly he would ask me for like that note on like whoever the key central midfielder was for almost every team. It's just a simple way of like listening to what somebody says. What are they trying to do? How are they trying to do their job? And how, as an analyst or a researcher or a numbers person, you can support them and make them better, which just builds collaboration and builds trust and opens a lot of doors for you.
Yeah, that's the central marriage between stats and the people who communicate the statistics and the story of the game. I'll say this because this man really impacted my life more than I thought it would. But Barry Sachs, if you watched ESPN at any point on Sunday, Barry Sachs was a producer at ESPN for a long time. I don't know if you crossed paths with him, Paul, but
I did a little bit.
He was my professor at Quinnipiac University. So, and he was always super kind to me. He would always reach out. Unfortunately, he passed away this weekend. He suffered a massive heart attack on Friday, but it was very nice to see everyone kind of share their stories. And my personal story, if you'll indulge me, is he always said to me, what is the story and why does it matter? Like that was always his central purpose when producing a show. What's the story? Why does it matter? And he always get rid of everything else. We need to give the audience this. And when you talk about that specific example, Roberto Martinez was asking, what's the story and why does it matter? It's this always marriage between statistics and the quote unquote, the people who quote unquote are involved in the game or whatever.
Coaches, players, analysts.
Exactly. There's this narrative of stats people and former players or coaches and such don't really get along. But I feel like when we can find that middle ground of what the story is, and we can use those statistics to be able to tell the story in a better way, that to me is the perfect use of analytics. It's the perfect use of storytelling with something as factual and specific as analytics and an overarching theme like a story of a game is. And that's something that Barry always really emphasized with me and really emphasized with our classes. And so very organic way, I didn't even, think of how much Barry's kind of impacted me personally and countless others as well. So my little, nugget for Barry on this Monday, February 13th, we're recording.
No, Barry's he was at ESPN for over 30 years and impacted people from PAs to researchers to talent to, people higher up, and just one of an ESPN lifer in a lot of ways that so many people respected. I didn't work with them a ton, but a little bit on, I think it was Euros in like 08, Fed Cup in 09. And what's the story? It was something I heard from him more than once.
And he always was the person who, if he didn't know a sport, he would dive into it. He told us a story where he was covering NASCAR for some reason, and he wasn't a big racing person. But he said that the 6 weeks leading up to when he was starting on that show, he consumed racing as if it was his life. And so it's that dedication of, if you want to break into football and you like football, learn football. It's the stuff that Rodrik was saying. Everything ties into it, storytelling and the amount of effort and work that you put into it all ties in together. So that's something that Barry not only taught me, but countless others, and not just at ESPN, but all over with, the work he did at Quinnipiac and teaching and such.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you, Sergio. And thanks again to Rodrik David for joining us on the show. I have lots of other football-centric episodes in the archives, including former NFL GM Mike Tannenbaum, Brian Burke of ESPN Analytics, and Cynthia Freeland, data scientist at NFL Network. While you're there, please subscribe, rate, and review the show. We always appreciate that. And you can follow us on Twitter at TruMedia Sports, TRU Media Sports. On behalf of producer Sergio de la Espriella and all of us here at TruMedia, I'm Paul Carr. Thanks for listening to Expected Value, the podcast that goes inside the sports analytics world.